tomorrow's CCS tournament, it taking place at DreamHack Bucharest, which is only a 4-team tournament. It's EnVyUS, FNATIC, NIP and TSM. On the surface, it's a 4-team tournament qualifying out of an online league into a LAN finals. And yes, these are 3 of the best teams in the world. My number 1, 2, and 3 in terms of FNATIC, and well, the other way around, EnVyUS, FNATIC, and NIP. And then TSM are number 5. So yes, it looks very stacked there. But the more important factor is that this is a chance for us to see FNATIC versus EnVyUS in an offline, either best of 3 or if they get to the final, best of 5 scenario. And right now, that is the most exciting possible matchup between 2 titanous teams right now, because as the title of this video says, that matchup right now for us in CSGO and Counter-Strike is our Mayweather versus Pacquiao. And so let me explain this concept. For anyone who isn't familiar with boxing or only very loosely knows about these things, Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Manny Pacquiao are considered 2 of the greatest fighters ever. And up until a few years ago, they were still to some degree in their prime. Like Mayweather is to this day undefeated. He's 47-0 in fights. And he's a 5-division champion. He's been a world champion in something like 4 different weight classes. There's been numerous times. I mean, some people he's considered the pound for pound best boxer in the world. Some people consider him the best boxer of all time, considering his style, how effective it is, the sheer amount of success he's had, the fact that no one can beat him. Then you go over to Manny Pacquiao. He's actually been an 8-division world champion. They've both won like 10 world titles. Manny Pacquiao for a long time was considered the pound for pound best fighter. Between the 2 of them, here's the key thing: between the 2 of them, these 2 great fighters who were 2 clearly the greatest in their times, and in theory, to some degree, they're still around now. Depends on which one you're talking about. Between the 2 of them, it was pretty much back and forwards. Like one year, one would win like Boxer of the Year from this organization, then another year the other one would win one, and all that you could really agree on if you're a boxing fan of these 2 fighters was the 2 of them are the greatest. Now, who is better between them? That was the eternal debate, because the problem was, even though they were around and they were fighting in similar divisions, they never fought each other. And now the next fight for both of them is they're going to fight each other. It's finally scheduled. So this is the big match. This is the one everyone wanted. The problem is everyone wanted to see this match a few years ago. So now I'm going to bring in the Counter-Strike analogy here, because in terms of Counter-Strike, we had a similar scenario where it's not just that FNATIC dominated Counter-Strike. Yes, they did. It's not just that EnVy have dominated recently. Yes, they did. It's that between the 2 of them, the dominance is just like, whichever one you choose, whichever one you prefer, whichever one you think was better, whichever one you value the results of more, one thing you can agree on is that the 2 of them together dominated the last era of Counter-Strike. Okay, FNATIC's lineup was made way back in like late July or something like that. But the lineup for LDLC and now EnVyUS was only made in early September. But if you look at the period from early September onwards, when both lineups existed, there have been 18 tournaments collectively that they've attended. Not as in they've both were there, but 18 tournaments since that period of time where at least one of them played. Of the 18 tournaments, there was something like... Okay, of the 18 tournaments, only 3 were not won by one of these 2 teams. So of the 18, 15 of the 18 were won by one of these 2 teams when at least one attended. FNATIC won 8 of them and were finalists in 9 and made the top 4 of 13 out of the 14 they attended. EnVyUS won 5, were finalists in 8 and were in the top 4 of all 12 they attended. So you can see, in terms of consistency, no one can match these teams. In terms of finals, no one can match these teams. In terms of titles, no one can match these teams. Okay, I told you there, FNATIC have 8 titles. I'm counting ClutchCon there. And EnVyUS have 5 titles. But you have to realize the next best teams after that are teams that you're looking at, like a team like Virtus.pro, for example. Even if we count in those shitty tournaments like Split Invitational, that small tournament, they're still only looking at something like 3 or 4 titles in this time span. No one's close, and those are the really smaller tournaments. In terms of these bigger events, no one's close to the big events. I mean, there was 3 majors in that period of time. These 3 teams won them. LDLC, well, there was actually 2 majors at that time. LDLC won 1, now EnVyUS. FNATIC won 1. These are the 2 teams who were the dominant teams of this period of time. And the key thing is, now we want to see them versus each other, because the last major was won by FNATIC. 2 of the last 3 events were won by EnVyUS. Now we want to see them clash. We want to see them play. Now we're in a best of 5 format. Play that best of 5. Play another best of 3 now to see, well, who's really the best. Because actually in my rankings, I've just put EnVyUS number 1 because they've won a couple of tournaments now. FNATIC haven't attended tournaments, but FNATIC won the last major. They won IS Panamera when all the best teams were there. So in their own way, they can stake their own claim for it. So now we need to see them play each other. But that's where we have to go. In fact, let me just set it up for you. Here's the thing. Considering these two teams had that insane record I told you, where FNATIC have 13 top 4 finishes out of 14 tournaments, and EnVyUS have 12 top 4 finishes out of 12 tournaments, and EnVyUS have been in 8 finals, FNATIC have been in 9 finals. When you look at the sheer number of times they're making semi-finals and finals, they actually haven't played each other very many times in finals or semi-finals, believe it or not. And so let me go through kind of the history here, because what's amazing is they have been the consistent teams and the dominant teams of this era, but it's almost like they took turns in terms of winning, and they didn't actually meet as many times as you might have thought, considering how successful they were. So here's the timeline. The first tournament where both existed and both attended was DreamHack Stockholm. Now, they both made the semi-finals, but FNATIC got shocked by Titan, and in the final, LDLC lost to Titan, so they never got to play each other then. Then we had Face It Season 2 LAN. LDLC, they lost. It was their turn to lose in the semi-finals. They were shocked by iBuyPower. iBuyPower went to the final. FNATIC beat them. Then finally we got the meeting. The first proper meeting offline was ESWC final. And FNATIC won with ease, 2-0, crushed them. A week later, there was Fragmite Masters Season 3 LAN finals. In the grand final, both teams met again. Best of 5 this time. FNATIC won 3-1, and the only map they lost was an overtime game. So FNATIC's dominating so far. Then we had DreamHack Winter, the major. In the quarter-finals they met. It was this series where it was 2 back and forward maps. LDLC won Dust 2 easily, FNATIC won Cash easily. Then we had the infamous overpass where there was the boost after LDLC were way ahead and were very likely to win. FNATIC did the boost, they won. In the end it was a forfeit. FNATIC had to forfeit. LDLC go on and win the title itself. Then FNATIC goes off, they just win ESEA, but EnVyUS isn't there. MLG Aspen, finally another tournament where they're both there together. We want to see them play because LDLC just won the major, their first big tournament, like huge one. FNATIC were the ones who'd won all the ones before. At this tournament, they both make the semi-finals. We get denied again. FNATIC lose out to NIP. NIP plays LDLC in the final. LDLC win. iOS Pantamera. They play in the group stage. FNATIC win that game on Nuke, but neither team really plays Nuke, so it was kind of inconsequential. But then the semi-final, they meet each other. LDLC again. They win Dust 2. It's actually EnVyUS now. EnVyUS wins Dust 2. And then it's an overtime game on Cash on the second game. We go to a third map. And it's Nuke. So FNATIC win an easy Nuke. But again, it's a bit unsatisfying because who the fuck wants to see those two teams play Nuke? They don't play Nuke. ESL 1 Katowice. Both teams make the semi-finals. FNATIC make it to the final. This time EnVyUS are the ones who lose out. They lose to NIP for the first time in an offline best of 3. FNATIC win the title in the final there. FNATIC sit at home. EnVyUS go to Gfinity. Win dominant fashion. FNATIC sit at home. EnVyUS go to Starladder Season 12 finals. Win in dominant fashion. Now, the last 2 tournaments, now we're finally getting a couple of non-wins. EnVyUS make it to the semi-finals of ESL Winter, EPL Winter rather. They lose out to Navi there. FNATIC end up finishing second at the most recent ESEA last week, finishing to Virtus Pro there. So you've seen kind of the way they've always been close, and they could have met like 10 times, and they only met something like 4 times in best of 3s. And most recently, we haven't had the big meeting when, before, like I described the scenario there, it was always FNATIC just beating up on EnVyUS. It was always them beating up LDLC. It was never really a time. I mean, the only time when it was going to happen was LDLC was going to beat them at the DreamHack, but then they had the whole boost thing and the forfeit. So we never really got to see, like, okay, LDLC can win tournaments. They're clearly very, very good, but can they actually get the better of FNATIC? Can they really prove that they're the best team in the world? And okay, they became the best team in the world on results and on ranking, but not by actually beating the team that was the dominant team of the era. So now you get to a period where now EnVyUS had all this dominant form at these other tournaments that FNATIC wasn't at, and now FNATIC hasn't won a tournament since that major, which was back in March. So now we want to see them play now, because now if EnVyUS wins, hey, now they're legitimately, hey, we're the best in every sense in the world, and we've knocked out FNATIC. Maybe this is our era. Maybe we take over and it becomes only our era now. Maybe FNATIC's era, or maybe FNATIC beat them again. Maybe FNATIC extend their era. Maybe FNATIC make it more dominant towards them, so the stats go even further towards them, because they already have some of the stats in their favour, and then it'd be even more overwhelming. Now, here's where the analogy to Mayweather-Pacquiao comes in again, because here's the problem. When I describe the Mayweather-Pacquiao situation, even someone who doesn't know about boxing, you can see there that these are clearly 2 incredible fighters with all these stats and all these championships and all these titles and different divisions and everything and all these awards they've had. Obviously, they're the 2 fighters you want to see fight, right? The problem is they waited too long. Now, there's the whole politics thing of like Mayweather maybe was ducking Pacquiao and he purposely set up all these hard conditions so that they wouldn't actually ever have to fight, so he could just remain undefeated here. And then people say that now he allowed the fight to happen because Pacquiao lost a few times, so now Mayweather thinks it's an easier fight for him. And so really, unfortunately, even though they're finally going to fight, unfortunately, it's not the same as it could have been if it had happened in, say, like 2011 or early 2012, when in that period, both fighters, in theory, were at their absolute best. Both were supposedly unbeatable, well, as much as you can be. Both were in a situation where everyone was like arguing back and forth, like, oh, Pacquiao would beat the shit out of him. No, Mayweather would find a way to neutralize him and beat him, and no one could beat him. And that was when the ultimate hype was. Now, unfortunately, what's happened in the meantime is that we've had losses for Pacquiao. So that's what kind of took some of the luster away from that. So even though it's still a great fight, even though it still could be awesome, still could be a fight Pacquiao could win, it hasn't got quite the fever pitch that happened before. Because in his last 5 fights, Pacquiao lost 2 of them. And unfortunately, and now listen, he lost 2 and then he won his last 3. So yeah, he's on a winning streak again. But losing those 2, and in the particular fashion he lost them, like one was actually a knockout, he got cleanly knocked out, the other was a split decision. It meant that it just took, like, it wasn't like they were both meeting when they were both on these insane streaks and all the titles, all the victories, and then they'd both meet like a collision at the absolute top of the sport. It's like, yeah, there was a dip, and then we had to wait for him to win a few more, and now finally the fight's went. Now, the CS analogy, to bring it back into CS, as to what happened there, is that, to be fair, if these teams could have met right after the major, okay, that would be good. The ideal would be if they could have met at like Star Ladder, because, okay, Envy then win Gfinity in dominant fashion. Now we have Star Ladder. But FNATIC doesn't go to that. EnVyUS win that in dominant fashion. Now we have these tournaments afterwards. But now EnVyUS isn't going to ESEA, so FNATIC goes there. And FNATIC isn't going to EPL, so just EnVyUS go there. And even worse than even just Pacquiao losing in that scenario, both of them lost. Both of these teams, that until those 2 last tournaments, the last tournament for each team, there'd only been 1 tournament out of, let me think, 16. Out of 16 tournaments that they'd both attended, well, 1 or the 2 have attended collectively, there'd only been 1 that they hadn't won. So they'd won 15 out of the 16 titles between them, so the hype would have been maximum value. But unfortunately, EnVyUS went and lost to Na'Vi in the semi-finals, and then FNATIC went and lost to Virtus.pro at ESEA, so now both are coming into this tournament where they're finally going to meet the epic matchup. But they're both coming off losses after this insane period where they really had dominated that era. And by the way, just to put a full stop on how dominant they'd been before these 2 losses, the only 1 time they'd lost out of the 16 times was that miracle run by Titan, when Titan had Kelly in the lineup, and people even questioned maybe Kelly was cheating there, and even if he wasn't, it was just a superlative event by Kenny S and the start from existence, everything. That was like a big one-off. Every other tournament, it was always FNATIC, it was always LDLC or EnVyUS who got to the title in the end. Even if you beat one of them, the other one was going to get the title. So that was, we needed to see these 2 teams meet. Now we still can. It's not as bad as the Manny Pacquiao Mayweather scenario where they're older and there's been losses, etc. It's still epic. And listen, it's still their era. Just losing 1 event each doesn't make it not their era. The stats are still overwhelmingly there. But it's interesting that it even follows the storyline of the Mayweather-Pacquiao scenario of like some of the luster being taken off it. I mean, ever since that Face It tournament that FNATIC won, they've had an insane run. They've won so many titles. They've beaten up LDLC and Envy almost every single time. Meanwhile, EnVyUS have never finished outside the top 4 of an event. I mean, they're obviously already in the top 4 at this event, so this will be like their 13th straight top 4, which is like mind-blowing numbers. Meanwhile, FNATIC, they don't have a streak like that anymore, because obviously that DreamHack Winter quarterfinals ruined that. But that's the only event they've ever finished outside the top 4. So they have their own insane numbers there. Then you look at the fact that they have the map crossover and the development of it over the years, because part of what made them so unbeatable was you knew EnVyUS and LDLC were going to play them on Inferno, because that was LDLC's best map at the time, but FNATIC were the gods of Inferno. They were unbeatable at the time with the way Crubs and JW were playing. So Inferno, both super strong on this map. Dust 2. Now, what's funny is FNATIC actually used to be even beating LDLC on it, but actually it's LDLC's best map. LDLC are probably the best team in the world on Dust 2, so we give that edge now over to LDLC. They're the specialists on Dust 2. Cash, both really strong on it. This is a map that's been very good for both these teams, even though LDLC's had some weird result, and EnVyUS rather had some weird losses, like losing to Nip on it. Well, since then they've been dominating teams on it. And you go over to Mirage now. In general, not played as much by EnVyUS. In fact, dropped quite a lot, especially in the LDLC period. But a specialty for FNATIC, one of their strongest maps. Now, you see what's interesting is that we've still got I've still got a lot of reasons to think this is an extremely exciting match. Like I said, it does tie into the analogy that some of the lost has taken off it, or rather, a better way to say it is it's not at 100% maximum hype for every single scenario where they are the unbeatable teams because they both lost recently. But this is still, this has the potential in terms of the historical context in a way that nothing else ever has in CSGO history of being the most important, most significant, best series ever played. Like if these two teams, what's better is they're not even in the same semi-finals, but it's double elim. If they could just meet in the final, if they could meet in the grand final, it's best of 5, that would basically be, in theory, the dream come true for you now. Now, whether it would play out like that, whether it would actually be as competitive, it'd be back and forth, and they'd play at the absolute peak level, like maybe they'd play and be able to beat out that NIP FNATIC MLG semi-final that I still think is the best offline best of X series played. You know, you can't be sure it will happen. It doesn't always work like that. But the potential is there for this to be the greatest match. And so this is our Mayweather versus Pacquiao. And just like that match, we're not quite getting it at the absolute peak, but hopefully we're going to get it. Now it's also possible, by the way the brackets work out, maybe we don't even get this matchup. But let's hope so, because this is the match we've all wanted to see. And finally, they're both at a LAN after that major that FNATIC won to reassert themselves. Because before that, yeah, FNATIC had won IES Pantamera, but winning that major really put FNATIC back at the top. Then EnVyUS had the streak of winning events since then, and EnVyUS never been below top 4. So let's finally get the two of them head-to-head in a huge match with all this stuff that's happened between, and all that historical context will pile in and make it even more significant, and we're finally going to get our Mayweather versus Pacquiao.